Welcome to Strange Reads. I'm David, and today's story is Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes. Flowers for Algernon is a story that will stay with you for the rest of your life. I don't know how many books I saved from high school, but I saved this one. It's an anthology of short stories, but to me, it's my Flowers for Algernon book. I don't really know what else is in here.
Daniel Keyes was born in New York City on August 9, 1927. His parents raised him in Brooklyn, where he attended a public school. He briefly attended New York University. His parents were keen for him to become a medical student, but he quit, age 17, to work as a ship's purser on oil tankers for the US Maritime Service. A year later, in 1945, he entered Brooklyn College to study psychology and would graduate in 1950. 1 month later, he began work for Magazine Management, an American publishing firm dabbling in a variety of periodicals. One such publication, Marvel's Science Stories, took the young man on as an editor. However, this magazine ceased to print in 1952. Subsequently, Keyes started work on their comic book line, at the time called Atlas Comics. Here, Keyes became an associate editor of Atlas under editor-in-chief and art director Stan Lee. Atlas rebranded as Marvel Comics in 1961. Keyes said, "Stan allowed me to specialize in the horror, fantasy, suspense, and science fiction comic books." While writing for Atlas Comics throughout the 1950s, he also wrote for EC Comics with the pseudonyms Chris Daniels and A.D. Locke. Daniel Keyes married Aurea Georgina Vasquez in 1952. During the latter years of that decade, Keyes taught English to special needs classes. With an idea he spawned during this time, he published Flowers for Algernon in the April 1959 edition of Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction. The story won the Hugo Award that year. In 1962, he started teaching creative writing at Wayne State University before becoming an English professor at Ohio University in 1966. During the early 1960s, Keyes expanded his short story, Flowers for Algernon, into a novel of the same name, which would be published in 1966. This version of the story won the 1966 Nebula Award for Best Novel, along with Babel 17 by Samuel R. Delany. Keyes wrote 8 other books, the most notable of which include 1981's The Minds of Billy Milligan, and in 1986, Unveiling Claudia. On June 15, 2014, Daniel Keyes died from pneumonia in Boca Raton, Palm Beach County, Florida, United States.
If Victorian children were supposed to be seen and not heard, the same could be said about Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes. Reading the book isn't just an experience of following a story, it's almost tangible. It plays out on the page before you. Something a little bit different here, we're just going to do the story premise. This will allow us to do longer form stories and give you the thrill of reading the whole story for yourself.
The short story and the novel are presented as a log of Charlie Gordon's self-penned progress reports. Charlie is a 32-year-old developmentally disabled man with an IQ of 68. He works as a janitor in a local factory and attends a literacy program taught by a lady named Miss Kinnian. As the story starts, we learn he will have an operation in the next few days. The procedure is the same as one performed on a laboratory mouse named Algernon. Charlie will be the first human to receive the treatment after Algernon showed marked improvements in intelligence. Part of the story's genius is how initial entries are filled with grammatical errors, poor diction, punctuation, and spelling mistakes. We see this on the page before us. Charlie's awareness of social events and cues are also evident in the stories he tells about his life. Following the operation, Charlie's writing changes. We see improvement. Charlie's intelligence gradually improves beyond that of those around him, including the doctors who performed the operation. He becomes conflicted with new thoughts about love, how his awareness and intelligence shape relationships, and how to forgive old friends who may not have acted in his best interests. Charlie faces these frustrations and attempts to come to terms with who he is. There are several differences between the short story and the novel. Some superficial details change in the book, such as he's 5 years younger and now he works at a bakery, not a factory. He recalls memories from his childhood, such as visiting the Warren State Home for the Mentally Retarded. The most significant addition is Charlie's expression of his sexual awareness. Keyes leans on his psychology background to present the typical stages of sexual development as Charlie builds relationships with Alice and Faye after learning why these women are different to his sister. Because of these themes, the book has met with controversy in the United States. One parent described the novel as filthy and immoral.
Like many parents, Daniel Keyes' folks wanted him to become a doctor. Like most of us, he eventually found his own way. Along this journey as a teacher, a comic book writer, and a son, Daniel Keyes found the inspirational pieces for this classic tale.
During his time at Atlas Comics, later rebranded as Marvel, Keyes worked beneath Stan Lee. Reflecting on the late 1950s, Keyes said, "Because of my experience editing Marvel, and because I'd sold a few science fiction stories by then, Stan allowed me to specialize in the horror, fantasy, suspense, and science fiction comic books. Naturally, I began submitting story ideas, getting freelance assignments, and supplementing my salary by writing scripts on my own time. Not all stories would get picked up, and one story in particular he didn't submit. The story idea was titled Brainstorm, and it felt bigger than a comic book script." Keyes had worked as an English teacher for special needs children in the late 1950s. One student asked if he might be placed in a mainstream class if he worked hard and became smart. Another student regressed after being removed from regular lessons. When he came back to school, he had lost it all. He couldn't read. He reverted to what he had been. It was a heartbreaker. Flowers for Algernon began as a paragraph-length synopsis reading, "The first guy in the test to raise the IQ from a low normal 90 to genius level. He goes through the experience and then he's thrown back to what he was." The mouse, Algernon, reportedly takes his name from the poet Algernon Charles Swinburne. When Horace Gold of Galaxy Science Fiction read the first submission, he suggested Keyes alter the ending, have Charlie retain his intelligence, marry Alice Kinnian, and live happily ever after. Keyes refused to make the change and sold the story to the magazine of fantasy and science fiction instead. In 1967, Algis Budrys of Galaxy Science Fiction praised Flowers for Algernon's realistic depiction of people as rounded characters. He said, "If this is a beginning, then what a beginning it is. And if it is the high point in a very short career, then what a career." The novel inspired the 1968 movie Charlie, starring Cliff Robertson and Claire Bloom. Robertson had previously starred in The Two Worlds of Charlie Gordon, a 1961 television adaptation of the short story Flowers for Algernon. He won the 1969 Best Actor Academy Award for his portrayal in the film. The novel has never been out of print since its initial publication and has sold over 5 million copies.
Flowers for Algernon was slated to be one of our first episodes. I hope waiting till season 2 has done it justice. We love chatting about all of these stories in the comments section, so if you have any ideas about Flowers for Algernon, stick in the comments, or if any other stories or authors or stories about the authors, let us know. But now is a good time for you to stick a like on this video because this progress report has run out of anything intelligent to say. Discover more speculative fiction tales in one of our other episodes. Don't be a stranger, subscribe and become a stranger. And remember, keep it strange.